Welcome. My name is Mark Gerling. I'm the firm owner of Gerling Law. We're going to spend the next few minutes going over how to use the rent ledger template that you recently downloaded. We're going to first begin with some very basic Microsoft Excel activities. I know for some of you who have some very quite advanced knowledge of Microsoft Excel, this might be a little bit of a waste of your time, but I promise we will get into the we will get to the heart of the matter with respect to the rent ledger template here within the next couple of minutes. This stuff will be pretty quick, I promise. So first things first. When you at first you download when you download your document, you open it up. At the very top at the very top of the screen, you're going to see a button that says Enable Editing. It'll be a yellow button with a green background. Go ahead and click into that button so we can start making modifications to this document. I've set this up so that it preloads some of the data that you entered in the form that you filled out. So you should see your rental property address here. All of this information you can edit. All you need to do is just you'll see I'm highlighting various fields right now. I'm going to move my cursor over the very first cell that has the address listed. I'm going to go ahead and just to show you how to edit this, we go into, this is called the function field right here. I'm going to click into there and I'm going to add an apartment number. So we're going to put in apartment 2. Boom. Okay, so that just shows you how you can, all I did was hit enter and everything took. So of course we have listed the address at the very top of the document, and then we have the renters' names. If you have multiple renters, please be sure to list them in there. Understand though that children are occupants, so you only want to have the people who signed the lease agreement listed as a renter in this situation. Okay, let's go over the columns briefly. Dates, pretty self-explanatory. Column A here. Descriptions. I would like you to provide a reasonable amount of information here. One of the things that I think is important, I'll address this now, is entering in a transaction line for rent when rent comes due. Most lease agreements most residential lease agreements in Texas are going to have the first day of the month as the rental due date. Now, one of the things that I see landlords getting confused over is they're thinking that the rent due date is when the grace period ends. Not at all. You're going to put in the rent due date. Don't worry about any grace periods or anything like that. Rent's due when it is due. We'll address late fees here shortly, but you'll see in this first month of January, we have a rent due date of January 1st, and then we have a rent payment date of January 3rd. So in this situation, this tenant was within the grace period, so there were no late fees to address. Okay, let's move on over to the credit column. So we have credits, we have debits, and then we have the balance. For those of you who don't have an accounting background, this is a debit with respect to the tenant. So when rent comes due, that's going to show up on the ledger as a debit, and that is going to in turn drive up the balance. Credits do exactly the opposite. Now, one of the things that I know judges appreciate is having separate columns here, because it makes the form look a lot less cluttered. It's easier to follow. So you can see here that we hit the tenant with a debit on January 1st, and then when the tenant paid on January 3rd, we have a credit, and that drove his balance down. Now, with the balance column, you'll notice, with the exception of the first field here, E4, there are formulas in here. So these formulas you have to be careful about. If you're adding and removing a lot of rows, which we'll get into here in a second, that can throw off these formulas. You want to make sure that no matter what formula you're in, or what cell you're in column E, that the formula for that column should always be reflecting the cell above. It should always be starting off with adding in the balance in the cell above. Then it will in turn add or subtract the adjacent cells as well. Okay, so let's talk about the gray versus the white on this field on this form. You'll see on this template, the odd numbered months are gray, even numbered months are white. You don't have to stick to that arrangement. Nothing wrong with starting with an even month, and if you do, just put it in the gray field. The main thing is you want to have your first month highlighted in gray. It just helps with it just helps the reader jump from month to month and understand that groupings of transactions within any one period. For example, look at the month of May. We have quite a few transactions there. It helps the reader understand that entire chunk of transactions is for 1 month as opposed to months above and below it. Late fees. You'll notice here that I've in cell B9, I have late fee dash initial. Now, this is for a situation where you have a lease agreement in which there's an initial late fee charge that's higher than the subsequent daily late fees. That's a very common arrangement in Texas. And the way now, one of the things I'm a big believer in is having one row for every transaction that you have on your ledger, with one exception: daily late fees. If you move down here to May, I'm in cell 15, B15. You'll notice that I have only one transaction for multiple daily late fees. In this situation, there were 10 late fees, and I've just grouped all those together. It just would be absurd to have 10 line items for your daily late fees, and the judge isn't going to be looking for anything like that. Okay, so one of the things that we don't have on this template that I think is worth addressing are NSF fees. Let's say, for example, during the month of February, the tenant's February 2nd check was returned. Well, I'm not going to make any adjustments to this line. One of the things that I don't want you to do is I don't want you to do something like deleting the line. The transaction occurred. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the cell. I'm going to click onto the row below where I want to start adding in rows. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to click onto where I have my cursor is called the tile. So I'm going to right click my mouse over the tile, and it's going to bring up this pop-up menu. I'm going to hit insert. Okay. Now I know I'm going to have to show that the payment was returned. I'm going to add a NSF fee, and then hopefully the tenant will make good on this payment. So I'm going to add in 3 rows here. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into one of the cells that already has data, or one of the rows that already has data. I'm going to select that entire row. I'm going to select the tile. So, and then I'm going to copy that. I'm doing a Control C, and I'm going down to the 3 rows that are empty, and it'll carry everything over. I'm just selecting the next 3 rows, and then I'm pasting that data in, Control V. Okay, so what that's done is it's carried all of the data and the formulas down from row 7 down into rows 8, 9, and 10. So now this is where the magic happens. Let's say that this NSF, this check was returned on the 5th. So I'm changing my date, and I'm going to put return payment. Okay, we definitely don't want to credit this our tenant for having the check returned, so I'm going to change that to a 0, and then we want to debit. We want to enter in a debit, so we're driving up his balance. So 1125. You can just enter in 1125. You don't have to add in the 2 zeros there like I just did. Okay, so that drove his balance up, and now we need to charge the tenant an NSF fee. And look at your lease agreement. The NSF fee should be in your lease agreement. Hopefully you have a good lease agreement that'll that should be in black and white on the lease. Let's say that we have a $75 non-sufficient funds charge for your tenants when they bounce checks. Okay, so, and we've got to change our date. So we're going to change that to the 5th as well. And then we want to go below, and let's say the tenant came back and made good on that check, that bounce check. We're just going to call that a payment because that's what it is. Don't worry about subsequent payment, corrected payment, made up payment or anything like that. It's a payment. Let's go ahead, and we do want to give them a credit here, but hopefully your tenant will have paid the NSF fee. So that would be $1,200, and that would drive his balance down to zero. That's exactly what we expect. So we've covered NSF fees, and we've covered late fees, both initial and daily late fees. I think we've shown how to manipulate some of this information. In the event, I know a lot of this data is pre-filled, mainly to give you an idea of what this form should look like. If for some reason, let's say you need to delete a column, delete a row. So what you're going to do is, just like you did to add in, to insert a row, I'm going to click onto the tile. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to select the delete option. Boom. So like in that situation, let's go back. Let's say okay, so tenant here, you see in E26, cell E26, the tenant owes $2,225. Well, we're going to take the tenant to court for this, presumably. However, Texas courts do not permit us to get a judgment for late fees. They're considered punitive damages. So now, if the late fees already been charged, like up here, you can see that well, that's not a good example. Let's look at, we have one up here. I'm looking at D18. We had that $250 in late fees. The tenant subsequently made a payment. So out of that $500, and again, this is driven by the lease agreement. Your lease agreement, if it's a well-written lease agreement, it will dictate what items are paid and in what order. And most of your lease agreements in Texas that are worth having will indicate that late fees are paid down first. So out of that $500 payment that was made on May 20th, the first $250 of it went towards late fees. Then the remaining $250 from that payment went towards the balance. Went towards rent, I should say. I'm sorry. So in this situation, because we're looking at taking this tenant to court, the judge is not going to give us late fees in our judgment. So I would probably go back and go ahead and delete these late fees out, which is something I know you don't want to hear as a landlord, but you have to do it because we know the judge is going to award it. So we have error there, so I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. So what I went to the cell above the error, and I copied that down, and I copied that cell and pasted it in right here. Now I'm going to go over and I want to change that cell to gray, back to gray. So one way to do that is I'm going to select a gray cell, go to home, hit my little format painter, the paintbrush icon, and then I'm going to copy. I'm going to select the cell I wanted to turn gray. Now, a couple of other things here. Our rent payments are $11.25 a month in this example. Judges appreciate being told what the per diem amounts are. In other words, what is the daily rent? Because you're going to, if you go to court on the 28th of July in this situation, the judge is going to want to know what 28 days of rent totals. He's not going to give you a judgment for the remaining 2 days, for those additional 2 days for the month of July. He's only allowed to give you a judgment for the up through the day of trial. So the month of July is a 31-day month, and that means what I've done here is I have divided my monthly rent payment of $11.25 by 31, and that's given me my 36.29. So I don't need a 30-day per diem. I would if it was, if it was June, if it was a month that had only 30 days in it. I'd be using that per diem instead. That was when we went to trial. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that out. And in this situation with our example here, this document is ready to go. I've already pre-programmed the print range for you. So this is all you need to do is to go ahead and print your document. You're good to go. All right. Thank you so much for downloading Girling Law's rent ledger template. If you have any questions about your rent ledger, my staff is always happy to help answer your questions. Our telephone number here is 817-659-2033. Good hunting.